showtime.
It's time for that radio show everyone loves.
Do not attempt to change the station. Just listen, and we'll keep broadcasting.
It's time to begin the show.
103.9 LI News Radio presents Your Island, the very best in talk radio, with your host, Tom Schilero.
And once again, welcome back as we're heading, by the way, folks, right up to that 3 o'clock hour. And we got some great topics to talk about, as we've been talking about since the beginning of the show. The world events, national events, local events, and so on. And the number 2 guy, I'm going to call him the number 2 guy of the events of September 11th, 2001, Al Zawahiri, is dead. The FBI has changed their poster, their most wanted poster, and in red letters it said dead. A lot behind that, though. So I kept thinking who would be a person to give us perspective, and no other name came up other than Ken Bombace. He is the CEO of Global Threat Solutions, Security Consulting, Protection Services, and Intelligence. He's all over the place, offices in New York and L.A. I understand he's down there in Miami right now. Former Army intelligence captain. He led counterinsurgency operations in Samarra, Iraq, kind of what we're talking about, and also worked with the Suffolk PD, retired criminal intelligence detective, also professor of criminal justice in Farmingdale. He served in Germany during the fall of the Berlin Wall, so I can't think of a better person to get perspective. Let's get perspective. Ken Bombace, how are you?
Excellent. Doing great, Tom. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I mean, again, I remember how I felt when Barack Obama, President Obama, walked down that red carpet and said, he's dead. We killed him. I'm telling you, it's almost like you feel a little guilty about being happy, but I was. Just like you remember September 11th. From a law enforcement perspective, I remember it also. I remember the great Suffolk Police Department. They were ferrying blood coming out of the Melville Red Cross. Turned out we didn't really need it. I remember covering for the Highway Patrol and how I felt that night. And then, of course, seeing the city as we went in, and it was almost like from another planet. The number of military vehicles that was so on. We were attacked, and close to 3,000 Americans lost their lives that day. And so we hear over the weekend, one of those architects who was sitting right next to Osama bin Laden that day while they were watching the towers go down was finally killed by the United States of America. And I say good riddance to him, and I think it was a great thing. But tell us how it all kind of came about, and the fact that we haven't forgotten that America is still out there to take these guys out. Ken?
That's right. Yeah, and it's a great perspective you have. I too served at Ground Zero, and I remember the feeling of, first of all, when I served there and saw the city and what had happened and how devastating it was, and then also when bin Laden was killed. And I made no bones about it. That was a time for celebration. I went into the city that night for drinks. And I'll tell you, Tom, it was very similar, this operation, to the one where they hunted and ultimately killed bin Laden. Now, that was obviously a raid, and this was just a drone strike. Or a missile strike. So what I would say is this is a time, President Biden definitely needed a win, and especially when it comes to Afghanistan. And this was that for him. As far as how this came about, like I said, very similar to the way that they hunted and tracked down bin Laden. There was months and months. They had intelligence that said that they believed he was in Kabul, and they had a location. They did surveillance for months and months to try and verify that this was him, and he was there. And ultimately, we have what we just learned about was that they had a successful strike, and successful strike in many ways. Not just that they killed the target, but also that they didn't kill anybody else. So this was a win for President Biden, win for America, actually, too, killing this number 2 person. Lets the world know we're not going to forget. Even when we don't talk about it, we have people whose sole mission in life is to hunt these people down and kill them.
Now, is it? I mean, I can understand if you're the president, you're going to take credit for this. But doesn't this go back to 21 years since that fateful day, that planning began that day, that afternoon, in the Situation Room or in some basement in CIA or DIA or the National Security Agency, that day started then and culminated into what took place on Saturday, or what took place when Osama bin Laden, and that it's merely the person living in the White House that will take that credit. Can we go beyond Joe Biden, beyond Donald Trump, beyond Barack Obama, beyond the Bushes and all of that other stuff, and say for the most part that this is the intelligence agencies getting together with a mission A mission certainly sanctioned by the executive branch, but a number of chief executives. And I'm not going to take anything away from Joe Biden. He was the president when this occurred. But we have to look at it in terms of that this was more than the system itself finally doing what we all wanted them to do.
That's right. In intelligence, I've worked in intelligence my whole life. You never hear about you rarely hear about their successes. You always hear about their failures, right? Those always come up. There's a lot of their successes. This one, obviously, at the highest level. We all know about it. It was in the paper. But a lot of the intelligence successes, you never hear. You don't hear about those because they're obviously classified. But you always hear about failures. So it's nice to see this. And of course, what you're saying is completely accurate. The chief executive of our country, obviously, it's whoever's in office at the time. It's the hard work of these full-time national security professionals that brought us here. That's what brought us to this day where we have him, this number 2, Zawahiri's killed, bin Laden's been killed. Of course, the president does have to give, for something at such a high level, got to give the thumbs up and give him the go-ahead to do it. But that's after months and years of painstaking work by national security professionals that made it happen, gave him the intelligence he needed to make that decision. So, of course, it is. It's the way our country works. And, of course, the president, the face of our country, is going to take a lot of the credit for it. But this was obviously our national security apparatus doing what we pay them to do every day.
Yeah, for 2 decades, but I definitely want to qualify what you just said, or underscore what you just said. And it is ultimately the president. It is ultimately the president who will make that decision. And he had a caveat to it. President Biden had a caveat and said no civilians killed, which brought me back to a quick little story. I had a very unique opportunity to go one-on-one with Bill Clinton. It was at an event. Bill Clinton was there. He was not the president anymore and so on. And it was absolutely, I'm telling you, fascinating to talk former president of the United States one-on-one. Nobody else around. It was just him and I. And I remember somehow the story got to 9/11, even though he was not the president. He was a president right before 9/11. He had said, he related a story to me that he was in the Oval Office one day and they came in. I guess it would be national security agents or agency came in or some high level person and said, we've just pinpointed Osama bin Laden. He was on our list, as you well know, way before 9/11. He was somebody we wanted. He said, we know where he is. We can get him. Give us the order. We'll take him out. And I remember President Clinton had told me this, and he said that the first question he asked is, well, how many other people? And they said about 34 others would probably be killed in this. I guess it was going to be a cruise missile or something like that. He said, how many of them are children? He says, most of them. And he decided not to give the order. The question is, from a national security perspective, had he killed Osama bin Laden in 1997, would 9/11 not have occurred? Or that's easy to say because no one could predict the future. But at the same time, using that intelligence, do we sometimes become overly protective against civilians to our own detriment? This is, a philosophical question because I probably would have made the same decision that what he had told me.
Right. So, listen, at the time, bin Laden wasn't who we know as bin Laden now, right? Of course, he had intelligence that this was a dangerous terrorist. We know where he is. We could get him. He made a decision, and that's exactly what we're talking about, Tom. The president, it is the national security people who are putting in all this hard work to find, locate, and put together an operation to kill him. President has to make the call, and by the way, that's where you get the big bucks, right? Because look what you just talked about. I mean, does President Clinton wish he had given the thumbs up for that? Only he would know. Only he would know, and that's a lot. That's a lot to think about that we could have avoided 9/11. Listen, bin Laden was a driving force. He wasn't a figurehead. He was a driving force in the 9/11 attack. So there's a chance that could be true. We could have avoided that terrorist attack. No one knows for sure. And, as a commander, you have to make a decision, and then you have to live with it after. I've done it in the battlefield, and President Clinton did it at a much higher level. But that's what they get the big bucks for. It's great to make a decision like this one. No collateral damage. You got your target, and you then you get to go and make a speech. And then there's the other side where you make a decision and it's not successful. And it wasn't just President Clinton. There were other opportunities, I think, in the very beginning when we invaded Afghanistan, where they thought they had bin Laden cornered, and the decision was made not to to dedicate certain resources to do that. So, I mean, that's what it is, being a commander. You make decisions and you live with them after. You make the best when you can at that time.
Before I go on to our other topic, just looking at this now, it's over. We got this guy. There's probably more on our list. I found it fascinating that he was on the FBI's 10 most wanted list, and I saw the new poster. You would be happy, I would be happy. It now says deceased across the poster, and I think that's absolutely fantastic. But what is the global threat at this point going forward? We know Taliban went against their agreement they had with Donald Trump. Trump inked an agreement with the Taliban, if you so take over, because they were heading towards a withdrawal of American troops from Afghanistan with the assumption that the Taliban would take over, that they would not harbor these evildoers, these horrible people from Al Qaeda and so on. No great friends. But it was obviously they were harboring him. They were allowing him. They knew he was there, and so on. As we look forward, though, what is the new global threat in terms of Al Qaeda and these type of people? We know we can't trust the Taliban. We never could trust the Taliban. I don't even know why we would even ink an agreement with them, but we did. But as we go forward, global threat, something you work on, particularly threat to Americans inside the continental United States. How would you assess it post Bin Laden, post Al Zawahiri?
So I'll tell you, Tom, it's increasing. There's no other way to look at this. I mean, let's look at what just happened. This number two man in Al Qaeda, the number two to Bin Laden, found a safe house. He was living in a safe house in Kabul, and he's living there because the Taliban was in charge. So I mean, there's no way to look at this. Yeah, on one side, President Biden saying this is a great victory, and he's right. On the other side, we have a much greater threat in Afghanistan than we did when we were there. There's no way around that, right? We have the Taliban is not going to be a cooperating partner to identify, hunt these people down, and kill them. It's as simple as that, right? Where we did have some of that cooperation when we saw the presence there. So it's a more dangerous world, and as time goes forward in Afghanistan, that threat this is what happened originally. Right, Afghanistan was a lawless country that Al Qaeda found, a safe harbor there, and they said, "Wow, we could sit here and train and plan to kill Americans all day long, and nobody will bother us." And that's what happened. Now, obviously, we've learned a lot since then, and we could perform strikes like this, but it's still much more dangerous with the Taliban in control of that country.
Well, it's deja vu all over again. If you go back to the days of September 2001, it was the Taliban in charge of Afghanistan that were providing training camps for the 19 hijackers, some of them, and assisting in that horrific day. And when the time came for us to approach the Taliban right after 9/11, give up Bin Laden, they essentially said, "You have no proof that we were complicit," and that's why we ended up moving into there and knocking them out. Would we knock them out in 3-4 weeks or whatever it took to knock out the Taliban? And then this history. We're almost at that point today. Of course, we could look at the Biden administration and the withdrawal of Afghanistan and now look in terms of them harboring these type of individuals in spite of a deal they had with the Trump administration. But essentially what I'm saying is that you're right. You're 100% right in your assessment. Because that seems to be where it is. So much to talk about. Nancy Pelosi a few hours ago landed in Taiwan. The Chinese are livid. They are making all sorts of, some of the rhetoric they're saying is not very nice. How do you view that in terms of a threat, a global threat?
Listen, and as far as I'm concerned, Tom, China is the greatest threat we face, and this is a nuclear power, and they are not being ambiguous like we are with our strategic ambiguity. They're saying if you do this, there will be retaliation, military retaliation. Right now, China has tanks. We're watching it live on the news, running through the streets in China. And this is concerning. I know they're trying to say it's saber rattling in the White House right now, and this is no big deal. This is something of concern right now. China's made a direct threat. We followed through on what we said, and we should. We should not have bowed down to China and not have visited. But this is something that we have to consider in the much bigger picture of our national security. Look at the world we're living in right now with Russia, the way that they've been behaving, obviously, in Ukraine, China, bad actors like these in Iran. This is very critical time right now for U.S. national security. And this is the greatest threat. I know, Vladimir, we've had 2 nuclear powers in the last year making direct threats to us. This is not normal. This is many, many decades since we've faced a threat like this directly. So they could try and downplay it, and I think that's the only strategy they have right now. But this is serious. We followed through on our visit, and China's going to, China says directly that they're going to act. I think the big picture here, Tom, we need to focus. We've been running military training exercise every single year, the Navy, and with the scenario that China would invade Taiwan. And in those training exercises, this is coming from the Department of the Navy, the U.S. loses every time in those training scenarios. We need to be focusing on our military, on our capabilities right now, and investing in those to counter these threats that we face. This is not like any time we've seen in decades.
And backing up what you're saying is that I couldn't even imagine a foreign country telling the United States of America, who, and she happens to be second in line for the presidency. She's an important figure. Whether you like Nancy Pelosi or not, it's who she represents and what she is and the position that she holds. To be told to tell the United States of America that one of your top government officials can't travel anywhere on this planet is amazing. And to be emboldened and empowered in such a position certainly gives credence to things that you do in terms of global threats and so on. That had to boggle your mind a little bit for a foreign power to say that to the United States of America.
Yeah, this is a direct response to what is a perceived weakness in America right now. There's no doubt about it. We've seen this. We've seen this in the last 2 years. My God, look at what Vladimir Putin did. That wasn't random. He waited. He's calculated. He invaded when he knew he could do it. And he did. And the response has been, there's obviously no direct. All he had to do is threaten the fact that he has nuclear weapons. And we've all sat on the sidelines and watched. And now China sees that and they get empowered by that. And now they're making direct threats to us. If people don't see this as the greatest threat we face right now in so many levels, Tom, we've talked about this before. These countries, Russia, Iran, China specifically, we are their sworn enemy. It's part of their doctrine to defeat us in every way. And we don't treat them as such. We treat them as an Asian business partner. That's not what they are. We're their enemy. That's what they consider us. And we should consider them ours and treat them accordingly. And that should be done in every level, economically, militarily. That's how they should be handled. And we don't. And, to go back to this topic in general, strategic ambiguity is never a good idea. That's what's led us to this right now. President Biden, when asked at the White House one day on a press conference, basically, would we respond militarily if China invaded Taiwan? He said, yes, that's what we're obligated to do. Well, actually, we're not. Not as a formal agreement. The Taiwan Relations Act of 1979, that's the only thing we have in writing right now, and it does not state that we have to intervene directly by sending military troops. So I think we need to change our policy when it comes to Taiwan and China and take a stronger stance right now. Otherwise, you have what we're looking at right now.
We have a minute left. Do you think inside of Taipei, inside of China, inside of Russia, the Russian Federation, they do threat assessments based on the leadership? Do they say, well, what's the assessment of the threat if we take an action with President Biden versus, let's say, when Trump was president or Obama was president? Do you think they assess the leadership of this country as to determine whether they're going to take an action or not?
Oh, of course they do. And so do we. We do that with other countries too. We do leadership assessments. CIA has whole units that do that. So of course they've done that. And I think anybody, regardless of your political affiliation, that would suggest that they didn't think that there was a vulnerability when Joe Biden took over for President Trump. However you feel about President Trump, I think that they're not being honest with themselves. I think that everybody sees that what we're looking at right now, this chaos, these heightened threats we're facing, direct responses from these countries. I think that's clearly what they're looking at right now is what they see is a weak presidency, a weak executive branch right now, taking advantage of it.
Well, we're going to keep a close eye on the international news, and Ken will certainly have you back. Thank you for your contribution to our show, and we'll talk to you again soon, my friend. Ken Bombace, thank you.
Great, Tom. Thanks for having me on.